The stars had belonged to the Galactic Concordance for 60,000 years, and in all that time, the 12 ancient species who ruled the Orion Arm had never once faced a true challenge to their power. They had seen countless younger civilizations rise from their homeworlds, reach for the stars with hope in their hearts, and then fall silent forever when the Concordance decided they were too dangerous to exist. The pattern was always the same, and the outcome was always certain when their long-range sensors first detected radio signals coming from a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The Concordance did what they always did. They watched and waited and studied for 30 years. Their observation drones circled Earth in the darkness between planets, recording everything about the strange creatures who called themselves human. Analysts who reviewed the data grew concerned very quickly. These humans were aggressive in ways that troubled even the most battle-hardened species in the Concordance, and they waged wars against each other with a passion that seemed almost religious. They had survived ice ages and plagues and disasters that should have ended them a dozen times over. And each time they came back stronger than before. Their planet was a nightmare of extreme temperatures and crushing gravity and deadly predators. Yet somehow they had not only survived but thrived. The high chamber of the Concordance met in their great station at the center of known space, and the 12 representatives debated for many long hours about what to do with this new species. Some argued for immediate destruction, saying that humans were too unpredictable to ever be controlled. Others suggested that perhaps these creatures could be useful as soldiers or workers if they were properly contained in the end. They chose the same solution they had chosen 14 times before when dealing with dangerous Death World species. They would offer the humans a choice between submission and extinction, knowing full well that proud young species almost always chose to fight. Ambassador Kethval of the Silthrani Dominion was selected to deliver the message, because his species was known for their diplomatic skills and their ability to appear reasonable even when delivering terrible news. He arrived in the Sol system with a fleet of 50 warships at his back, their hulls gleaming with technology that humanity could barely comprehend. The transmission he sent to Earth was translated into every human language and broadcast across every channel so that no one could claim they had not heard it. "People of Earth," the ambassador said, his pale face filling screens around the world, "the Galactic Concordance has watched your development with great interest, and we have determined that your species presents an unacceptable risk to galactic stability." He explained that humanity would accept what he called protective containment, which meant they would never be allowed to leave their own solar system. All research into faster-than-light travel would be surrendered immediately, and human population would be reduced and controlled. To prevent future expansion, refusal to accept these terms would result in the complete destruction of human civilization. The message ended with a deadline of 72 hours for Earth's leaders to respond in the underground command center of the United Earth Coalition. Admiral Helena Cross watched the transmission with eyes that showed no fear, only a cold and calculating anger. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face marked by decades of military service. Behind her stood the Joint Chiefs of every nation that had agreed to unite under the Coalition's banner when the aliens first appeared in their sky. "They're not offering us a choice," she said quietly. "They are offering us a slow death instead of a fast one." She had read the classified reports from the xenorchaeology teams, who had spent years studying ruins on Mars and in the asteroid belt. Ruins that predated human civilization by millions of years. 14 other species had once lived in this region of space, and all of them had vanished without a trace. The Admiral suspected she now knew why. Earth's response was broadcast to the alien fleet exactly 70 hours after the ultimatum was delivered, the message was simple and contained only 2 words in the Silfrani language that the translation teams had worked frantically to learn the words meant, "We refuse." Ambassador Kethval received the transmission and felt something he had not experienced in his 300 years of life. Genuine surprise. Every other species had either surrendered or begged for more time to negotiate. None had ever simply refused. He reported the response to the High Chamber, and they gave him the order he had expected. The combined fleet of the Galactic Concordance began moving toward Earth. 4,000 warships carrying enough firepower to crack the planet in half. Admiral Cross watched them come on her tactical display, and she felt the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. Earth's stellar navy had only 200 ships, and most of them were barely more than converted cargo vessels with weapons bolted onto their hulls. They had never fought a real space battle before, and they were about to face the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. She gave the order to launch anyway. The battle began at the edge of the asteroid belt, and it was over almost before it started. Human ships exploded like fireworks against the black canvas of space as alien weapons tore through their primitive shields, and armor pilots screamed their final words into radio channels that cut to static one after another. Admiral Cross watched from a hidden command station deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid as her fleet was reduced to scattered debris. In less than 19 minutes, the alien fleet did not even slow down. They continued toward Earth, and when they reached orbit, they began the bombardment. Cities that had stood for thousands of years vanished in columns of fire that could be seen from space. 3 billion people died in the first wave alone. Their bodies turned to ash in an instant. The Concordance made sure to target military installations and government buildings and anything that looked like it might be used for resistance. When they were satisfied that humanity had been broken, they established a quarantine perimeter around the Sol system and left automated weapons platforms to ensure no human ship ever escaped. Ambassador Kethval sent one final transmission to the survivors, huddling in the ruins of their world. "The Concordance takes no pleasure in this," he said, "but the galaxy must be protected from species like yours, and we hope that the humans who remain will learn to accept their place in the natural order." Then the alien fleet departed, leaving humanity alone in the ashes of everything they had built. The 12 species of the Concordance congratulated themselves on another successful containment and returned to their comfortable lives among the stars. They did not bother to occupy Earth or hunt down the survivors because they believed the fight was over. They believed humanity was finished. They were wrong. Deep inside the asteroid where she had watched her fleet die, Admiral Helena Cross stood before a wall of screens showing the destruction of her world. And she made a promise to herself and to the dead she would find a way to make them pay for what they had done. She did not know how yet, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not the end of humanity's story. This was only the beginning. 5 years passed in silence, and the Galactic Concordance grew comfortable in their belief that the human problem had been solved forever. Their sensors watched the Sol system from a safe distance, and month after month, they detected nothing that suggested the survivors were doing anything other than slowly dying. Radio transmissions from Earth became rare and then stopped completely, and the thermal signatures from human cities faded as power plants went offline one by one. The analysts who monitored the quarantine zone filed reports saying that humanity was collapsing just as expected, and the High Chamber received these reports with satisfaction. They had seen this pattern before with other dangerous species, and they knew that civilizations rarely survived the kind of devastation they had inflicted on Earth. The 12 ruling species turned their attention to other matters, confident that within a generation or two there would be nothing left of humanity but ruins and bones. They could not have been more wrong about what was happening on the broken world they had left behind beneath the scorched surface of Earth. In tunnels and caverns that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, the survivors of the bombardment were not dying. They were working. Admiral Helena Cross had spent the months after the attack gathering every scientist and engineer and military officer she could find, bringing them to a network of underground facilities that had been built in secret decades before first contact. These bunkers had been designed to survive nuclear war, and they proved just capable of surviving alien bombardment as well. The surface was lost, but below the ground, nearly 800 million humans lived on in artificial caverns, lit by fusion reactors and fed by hydroponic farms. It was not a comfortable existence, but it was enough to keep humanity alive while they planned their revenge. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was a small woman with tired eyes and hands that never stopped moving. And she was also the most brilliant physicist who had ever lived before the attack. She had been working on theoretical models of faster-than-light travel, trying to understand how the aliens moved between stars so quickly after the attack. Admiral Cross gave her access to something that changed everything. Wreckage from alien ships that had been damaged in the battle and crashed on Earth for 3 years. Dr. Tanaka and her team studied every piece of alien technology they could find, taking apart engines and sensors and weapons to learn how they worked. What they discovered was both terrifying and exciting. The aliens traveled through something called hyperspace, a dimension that existed alongside normal space but followed different rules to enter hyperspace. Ships needed to lock onto signals broadcast by massive structures called beacon nodes that were scattered throughout Concordance territory. These beacon nodes created corridors to hyperspace that ships could follow, and without them faster-than-light travel was impossible. The entire galactic civilization of the Concordance depended on this network of beacon nodes, and Dr. Tanaka realized that this dependence was also their greatest weakness. She presented her findings to Admiral Cross in a small conference room deep underground, a voice shaking with excitement as she explained what she had found. "If we destroy the beacon nodes," she said, "their ships become trapped wherever they are, unable to travel or communicate across the distances between stars." The Admiral leaned forward in her chair, her eyes sharp and focused despite the years of stress and grief. "How many nodes are there?" she asked. "Thousands," Dr. Tanaka admitted, "spread across 12 sectors of space, but they are all connected through quantum links that synchronize their signals." She pulled up a diagram on the screen behind her, showing the web of connections that held the concordance together. "If we can plant devices on enough of the primary nodes and detonate them at exactly the same moment, the cascade effect will destroy the entire network." Admiral Cross stared at the diagram for a long time, and then she asked the question that would determine everything. "Can we reach them without being detected?" Dr. Tanaka smiled for the first time in months and told the Admiral about her other discovery. While studying the alien drives, she had found evidence of something the Concordance had apparently missed for 60,000 years, a deeper layer of hyperspace that existed beneath the normal corridors. She called it the Abyss, and ships traveling through it left no signature that conventional sensors could detect. It was dangerous and unstable, and navigation was nearly impossible without the quantum computers her team had built using alien technology. But it was also invisible. "We can go anywhere," Dr. Tanaka said, "and they will never see us coming." The Admiral stood up and walked to the map of known space that covered one wall of the room, showing the vast territory of the Concordance and the tiny dot that represented Earth. "Then we need ships," she said, "lots of them, and we need them to be fast and deadly." and able to carry our people into the heart of enemy territory. She turned back to face her staff. I want every factory we have working around the clock. And I want every engineer focused on building us a fleet that can win this war. What followed was the greatest construction effort in human history. In secret shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt, workers labored in shifts that never ended, building vessels unlike anything humanity had ever created before. They did not try to match the massive warships of the Concordance because they knew they could never win that kind of fight. Instead, they built small and fast attack craft that could strike hard and disappear before the enemy knew what had happened. They built stealth ships coated in materials that absorbed sensor signals and made them nearly invisible. They built infiltration pods designed to deliver soldiers onto enemy stations and planets. They built weapons that targeted the specific weaknesses Dr. Tanaka's team had identified in alien technology. By the end of the 5th year, humanity had constructed a shadow fleet of over 3,000 vessels, crewed by men and women who had volunteered to fly into the unknown and probably never return. Admiral Cross stood on the bridge of her new flagship, a sleek black vessel called the Retribution, and looked out at the fleet assembled around her. These ships would not win through brute strength. They would win through cunning and speed and the willingness to do whatever was necessary. The Concordance had made a mistake when they assumed humanity was finished. They had forgotten that humans were survivors who had clawed their way to the top of the food chain on one of the deadliest planets in the galaxy. They had forgotten that humans did not give up, no matter how badly they were beaten, and they had forgotten the most important lesson of all, that there was nothing more dangerous than an enemy with nothing left to lose. Admiral Cross gave the order, and the Shadow Fleet slipped into the abyss and vanished from the Sol system without a trace. The silence that the Concordance had mistaken for death was actually the sound of humanity preparing for war, and now that war was about to begin. 2 years into the Shadow War, strange things began happening across the territory of the Galactic Concordance. A communications relay on the Silthrani homeworld failed without warning, cutting off contact with 3 colonial systems for nearly a week. A shipyard near the border of Keth Moravian Space suffered a reactor accident that destroyed 6 warships under construction. Cargo vessels carrying food and supplies to outer colonies vanished in transit, never arriving at their destinations and never found. At first, the authorities dismissed these events as random malfunctions and unfortunate coincidences. Technology failed sometimes, and space was dangerous even for the most advanced civilizations. But as the months passed and the incidents continued to multiply, High Executor Zilthax of the Concordance Security Council began to suspect that something else was going on. He ordered his best investigators to examine every failure and every accident, searching for patterns that might explain what was happening. They found nothing conclusive because there was nothing to find. The humans responsible had covered their tracks with perfect precision. Commander Abir Santis had been living among the aliens for 18 months, and every day he woke up wondering if this would be the day his disguise failed. He was a tall man with dark skin and quick hands, and the surgeons back on Earth had spent 6 months transforming him into something that could pass for Silphranathy, had grafted cloned alien flesh over his human body, changed the shape of his skull, and implanted devices that let him speak the alien language without an accent. The transformation was painful and horrifying. But Santos had volunteered for the mission because he wanted revenge more than he wanted comfort. He worked as a maintenance technician on Station Veris 7, the primary military communications hub for the entire Concordance. Every day he walked past guards who would have killed him instantly if they knew what he really was. Every day he smiled and nodded and pretended to be just another worker, doing his job, and every night he sent encrypted reports back to Admiral Cross, telling her everything he had learned about the station's defenses and weaknesses. He was not alone across Concordance space. Nearly 200 human operatives had infiltrated enemy territory, hiding in plain sight while they gathered intelligence and prepared for the attack to come. Some worked on space stations, others on planets, and a few had even managed to secure positions on military vessels. They were the ghosts in the machine, invisible and patient and absolutely dedicated to their mission, while Santos and his fellow infiltrators mapped enemy territory from the inside. Lieutenant Commander Priya Sharma led a different kind of mission through the darkness of the abyss. She commanded a flotilla of 12 stealth ships, each one carrying a special cargo, quantum-linked explosive devices designed to destroy beacon nodes. Her orders were simple: travel to designated coordinates, plant the devices without being detected, and return home to await the signal. The reality was far more complicated. Navigation through the abyss was treacherous, and the strange currents of deep hyperspace could tear a ship apart if the pilot made even a small mistake. Sharma lost her first vessel in the third week when it emerged from the abyss too close to a gravity well and was crushed like paper. She lost her second when a sensor malfunction caused the ship to surface inside a Concordance patrol zone, forcing the crew to activate self-destruct rather than risk capture. Men and women aboard those ships had known the risks when they volunteered, and they had accepted their fate without hesitation. Their sacrifice meant that Sharma could continue her mission without the enemy ever knowing what had happened. Over the course of 18 months, her flotilla planted quantum charges on over 200 primary beacon nodes across 3 sectors of Concordance space. Each device was small enough to hide in the structural framework of the massive stations, and each one was linked to all the others through quantum entanglement. When the signal came, they would all detonate at exactly the same instant. No matter how far apart they were, the beacon network would collapse, and the great civilization of the Concordance would be crippled in a single moment back on Earth. Admiral Cross reviewed the intelligence reports that came in every day from her operatives across the galaxy. She studied the enemy with the patience of a hunter stalking prey, learning their habits and their weaknesses and their blind spots. What she discovered confirmed her suspicions about how the Concordance had maintained their power. For so long, they had no armies. For 60,000 years, the 12 ruling species had fought their wars exclusively in space, using their superior ships and weapons to destroy any challenger before they could become a threat. When they wanted to occupy a planet, they simply bombarded it from orbit until the defenders surrendered, then sent administrative drones to manage the survivors. The idea of soldiers fighting on the ground was almost unknown to them because they had never needed such primitive tactics. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption that whoever controlled space controlled everything. Admiral Cross smiled when she read this, because she knew something the Concordance did not. Humans had been fighting ground wars since before they learned to write, and they had perfected the art of killing each other in every possible environment. Troops had trained in the tunnels beneath Earth for years, preparing for battles in corridors and rooms and buildings where ships and orbital weapons were useless. When the time came, she would show the aliens what human soldiers could do. The final piece of the puzzle arrived on a cold night in the 7th year of the Shadow War. A human operative named David Chun had spent 3 years working his way into the Silthrani Central Archive, the greatest repository of knowledge in the Concordance, had found what Admiral Cross needed most: a complete map of the entire beacon node network, showing the location of every station and the connections between them. Chun knew he would not survive the transmission because sending that much data would certainly be detected. He recorded a final message for his family, telling them he loved them and asking them to be proud of what he had done. Then he activated his transmitter and sent the files to the hidden relay that would forward them to Earth Concordance security forces, traced the signal in less than a minute, and stormed the archive with weapons drawn. They found Chun waiting for them with a smile on his face and a dead man's switch in his hand. The explosion destroyed the entire wing of the building and killed everyone inside. But the data was already gone when Admiral Cross received Chun's transmission. She stood alone in her quarters and wept for the man she had never met but would never forget. Then she dried her tears and called her staff to the war room. She finally had everything she needed. The counterattack would begin in 30 days. The signal went out at exactly 3 hours past midnight, Galactic Standard Time. On a day that will be remembered forever in the history of the known universe, Admiral Helena Cross sat on the bridge of the Retribution and watched the countdown reach 0. And then she pressed a button that changed everything across 12 sectors of concordance space, spanning distances so vast that light itself would take thousands of years to cross them. 2,847 quantum-linked devices detonated in perfect synchronization. The beacon nodes they were attached to exploded in brilliant flashes of light that could be seen from nearby planets for a few seconds. New stars seemed to appear in skies across the galaxy, and then they faded into darkness. The hyperspace corridor network that had connected the concordance for 60,000 years collapsed in an instant. Ships that were traveling between stars when the nodes exploded simply vanished, lost forever in the chaos of uncontrolled hyperspace. The lucky ones were torn apart quickly. The unlucky ones drifted in that terrible void until their crews went mad or their life support failed. Communication across the vast distances between concordance worlds became impossible because the quantum relay system depended on the same network. For the first time in recorded history, the 12 ruling species could not talk to each other, could not coordinate, could not even know what was happening beyond their own star systems. High Executor Zilthax was in his office on the Concordance Capital Station when the lights flickered and the communication screens went dark. He tried to contact his fleet commanders and received only static. He tried to reach the other members of the High Chamber and heard nothing but silence for several long minutes. He sat in the darkness and tried to understand what had happened. And then his tactical officer burst through the door with fear in his eyes. "Ships!" The officer gasped. "Ships are appearing everywhere, and we cannot identify them." Zilthax rushed to the command center and stared at the sensor displays. In disbelief. Vessels were emerging from nowhere, not from normal hyperspace corridors, but from some deeper layer of reality that concordance sensors had never been designed to detect. They appeared inside defense perimeters, beside orbital stations, within the formation of patrol fleets that had no time to react. The ships were small and black and moved with a speed and precision that should have been impossible, and they were everywhere. The human counterattack had begun. Commander Javier Santos had been waiting for this moment for 2 years, and when the lights on Station Veris 7 flickered, he knew his time had come. He pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed the activation switch, and the signal went out to the other human operatives hidden throughout the station. They moved through the corridors like shadows, killing guards and seizing control points with brutal efficiency. Santos himself led the assault on the main command center, kicking through the door with a weapon in each hand. The Silphrani officers inside had never seen humans before, had never fought against creatures who moved so fast and hit so hard. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes, and when it was over, Santos stood in the center of the room surrounded by alien bodies. He walked to the primary communications console and activated the broadcast system that could reach every military frequency in concordance. "Space, this is humanity," he said, his voice calm and steady despite the chaos around him. "We remember the 3 billion. And we are coming." The message went out to every ship and station that could still receive it. And the fear it caused was greater than any weapon on the Silthrani homeworld. The sky filled with fire as human drop pods screamed through the atmosphere. They came down not on the cities, as the Concordance had done to Earth, but on the strategic targets that controlled the planet: shield generators, power plants, water treatment facilities. Food distribution centers. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb led the assault on the planetary shield complex, his soldiers hitting the ground running and fighting their way through defenses that had never been designed to stop. Infantry. The Silthrani guards had energy weapons and armor, but they had no training in close combat and no experience fighting enemies who got inside their reach. Webb's troops moved through the facility like a storm, clearing room after room with grenades and gunfire, and the terrible efficiency of soldiers who had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Within 4 hours, the planetary shields were down, and human ships in orbit began landing reinforcements. High Executor Zilfax received fragmentary reports of similar attacks on a dozen other worlds, each one targeting critical infrastructure rather than population centers. The humans were not trying to destroy the Concordance. They were trying to hold it hostage. The combined fleet that should have responded to these attacks was scattered across the galaxy, unable to travel without the beacon nodes and unable to coordinate without communications. Individual admirals tried to rally their forces, but they were operating blind, not knowing where the enemy was or what had happened to their allies. Human wolfpacks, small groups of fast attack ships working together, hunted these isolated fleets with merciless precision. They would emerge from the abyss, strike hard and fast, and disappear before the larger alien warships could bring their weapons to bear. One by one, the proud vessels of the Concordance were destroyed or captured. Admiral Cross commanded the largest human fleet from the bridge of the Retribution, and she led her ships against the combined fleet's main base at Station Nexus Prime. The battle was the largest in galactic history, with over 1,000 ships on each side exchanging fire in the darkness between stars. But the Concordance forces were confused and frightened and cut off from command. While the human fleet moved with perfect coordination, Cross had spent years studying alien tactics, and she knew exactly how they would react to every move she made. She drew their heavy ships out of formation with feints and false retreats, then sent her strike craft through the gaps to hit their vulnerable support vessels. When the alien admiral finally realized he was being played, it was too late. His fleet was scattered and burning, and human boarding parties were already cutting through the hulls of his remaining ships. The battle ended not with a dramatic final stand, but with a whimper, as the last Concordance vessels surrendered rather than face destruction. Admiral Cross accepted their surrender and then broadcast a message to any alien forces that could still hear her. "The Concordance is finished," she said. "Your beacon network is gone, your fleets are destroyed, and your homeworlds are in human hands." She paused, let the weight of her words sink in. "You thought you could destroy us and walk away without consequence. But you were wrong." The counterattack had taken 47 days from the first detonation to the fall of the last major Concordance military installation. In less than 2 months, humanity had accomplished what no other species had done in 60,000 years. They had brought the mighty Galactic Concordance to its knees. But the war was not yet over. Admiral Cross knew that. Victory on the battlefield was only the beginning. Now came the harder task of deciding what to do with the beaten enemy and building something better from the ruins of the old order. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity would never again be underestimated. The Geneva Arcology had been humanity's largest underground shelter during the Dark Years. A vast complex of tunnels and chambers carved deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland now. It served as the capital of a species that had risen from the ashes to conquer the stars. Admiral Helena Cross stood at the window of the council chamber and looked out at the construction crews working on the surface, rebuilding what the Concordance had destroyed 8 years ago behind her. The members of the United Earth Coalition's Emergency Council sat around a long table, waiting for the alien delegation to arrive. The door opened, and Ambassador Cathfile entered the room. He was the same Silfrani diplomat who had delivered the ultimatum that started this war. And the years had not been kind to him. His skin was pale, and his movements were slow. And the confidence that had once radiated from him was gone completely. He was the last surviving member of the Concordance's High Chamber. The other 11 representatives had died when their homeworlds fell to human forces. Guards escorted him to a chair at the end of the table, and he sat down heavily, like a creature that had forgotten how to carry its own weight. Admiral Cross took her seat across from him and placed a document on the table between them. "These are humanity's terms for ending the war," she said, her voice calm but firm. Cathval looked at the document but did not reach for it. "Before we discuss terms," he said quietly, "I must know something." He raised his eyes to meet the Admiral's gaze. "Why did you not destroy us completely?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. "You had the power," the ambassador continued. "Your ships were everywhere. Your soldiers held our most important worlds, and we could not stop you." His voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "The Concordance would have shown no mercy in your position. We never did before." Admiral Cross leaned back in her chair and studied the alien across from her. "I know what the Concordance did to the species that came before us," she said. "We found the records, all 14 of them. Every civilization you erased because they were too dangerous or too different or simply too inconvenient." She let the words settle. "We could have done the same to you. And there were many among my people who wanted exactly that." Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who sat at the Admiral's right hand, spoke next. "We did not spare you because we are weak or because we felt sorry for you," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "We spared you because genocide is what you do, not what we do." The small physicist looked at the alien with eyes that held no warmth but also no hatred. "We learned from our own history what happens when you become the monster you are fighting against. And we decided a long time ago that we would not make that mistake." Kethful was silent for a long moment, processing words that clearly did not fit any pattern he had ever known. "Then what do you want from us?" he finally asked. Admiral Cross pushed the document across the table. "First, the Galactic Concordance is dissolved forever, and the 12 species will govern themselves as independent civilizations with no authority over each other." She tapped the next point on the list. "Second, human observers will be stationed on each of your homeworlds to ensure compliance with the peace terms and to prevent any attempt to rebuild your military alliance. Third, all records of the containment protocol will be made public, including full documentation of every species the Concordance exterminated, so that the galaxy will know the truth of what you did." She looked directly into the ambassador's eyes. "Fourth, the beacon node network will be rebuilt under joint control of all species, including humanity, and no single civilization will ever again have the power to cut off others from the stars." Cathval read through the document slowly, his tentacles trembling slightly as he turned the pages. "These terms are harsh," he said, "but they are also surprisingly fair." He looked up at the humans around the table with something like confusion in his expression. "You truly mean to let us survive?" Admiral Cross nodded. "We mean to build a new galactic order where no species has the power to erase another. And that includes us." She stood and walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of the alien ambassador. "But let me make one thing absolutely clear," she said, and her voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "If any species ever threatens Earth again, there will be no mercy and no negotiation." She leaned closer, and Kethful shrank back in his chair. "We will find you in the dark between stars, and we will end you so completely that even your memory will be forgotten." Her eyes were like ice. "This is not a threat. It is a promise that your successors will remember for the next 60,000 years." The ambassador stared at her for a long moment, and then he slowly nodded. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I will make sure my people understand as well." He reached for a pen and signed a document that would end this. Concordance forever. The Treaty of Geneva was ratified the next day, and the news spread across the galaxy through the first beacon nodes that human engineers had already begun to rebuild. The reaction from the 12 former concordant species was mixed. Some celebrated the fall of an empire that had oppressed them for millennia, while others mourned the loss of the stability and order they had known their entire lives. All of them feared what humanity might do with the power they now held, but the humans did not act like conquerors in the months and years that followed. They led the effort to rebuild what the war had destroyed. They shared the technology of the abyss with other species, opening new paths through the stars that did not depend on the old beacon network. They established councils and forums where representatives from every civilization could meet and discuss their differences peacefully. They did not try to rule the galaxy. They tried to heal it. Commander Javier Santos returned to Earth and spent years helping to restore the surface cities. Working alongside aliens who had once been his enemies, Lieutenant Commander Priya Sharma became the head of the new Galactic Navigation Authority, ensuring that the rebuilt beacon network remained open to all. Dr. Yuki Tanaka won the first ever interspecies prize for science, awarded for her contributions to understanding hyperspace and the abyss. And Admiral Helena Cross retired from military service and spent her remaining years writing the history of humanity's darkest hour and greatest triumph. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 93, surrounded by her family and honored by a galaxy that would never forget what she had done. But the lesson of the war lived on long after the last veteran had passed away. New species that rose to the stars in the centuries that followed learned the story of how humanity had been pushed to the brink of extinction and had come back to humble the mightiest civilization in known space. They learned that the small blue world called Earth had produced a people who refused to surrender no matter how badly they were beaten, and they learned the most important lesson of all, the one that kept the peace for generations after the Treaty of Geneva was signed. Humanity did not start wars, but they always finished them.